All right, welcome folks. We're gonna give it a minute as people trickle in, and Blake's gonna drop a link in the chat for you to explore while we wait.
There you go.
Just a few seconds more and then we'll get started because we've only got 45 minutes. All right, well, great. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Data Talks, which is a series of free 45-minute webinars about using local data to inform housing policy. My name is Claudia Aiken. I will be your host today. I'm Director of New Research Partnerships here at the Housing Solutions Lab, and I'm joined by Kimberly Rubens, Chief of Policy and Research for the Department of Housing and Community Development at the City of Baltimore, and also by Blake Salison, one of our terrific students at the Furman Center, who will be managing the logistics of today's session and teeing up your questions in the Q&A portion. Next slide, please. All right, thank you. So I'll start things off today with a quick introduction to the lab and this series. Then we'll spend about 15 minutes talking about what local data are and how they can inform housing policy. Then I will chat with Kimberly about some of the exciting ways that local data are being put to use in Baltimore. And finally, we'll have a good 15 minutes for your questions. So please feel free to submit questions via the Q&A function at any time during the session, and we will get to as many of them as we can. And I should say that we do plan to share a recording of this and all future episodes with registrants and on our website, along with the slide decks and some recommended reading so that you can kind of click through at your leisure. Next slide. So if you're not familiar with the Housing Solutions Lab, we're based at the NYU Furman Center, and our mission is to help small and mid-sized cities plan, launch, and evaluate housing policies with the goal of advancing racial equity, health, and well-being. Next. And we do this in a variety of ways. Really at the core of what the lab does is direct engagement with cities to help them think through their housing challenges. And we do this both through peer learning and direct technical assistance. We also maintain kind of an encyclopedia of housing policies and tools on our website at localhousingsolutions.org. And finally, being embedded within the Furman Center lets us do really high-powered research and evaluation in partnership with cities to study which housing policies work and which don't. Next slide. So through this kind of direct work with cities, we've discovered that there's just a lot of frustration out there with national housing data sets, especially among the smaller cities, where it's harder to get an accurate, granular set of data, especially when your housing conditions are changing quickly. So today is an introduction to the potential of local data to address some of those challenges. And I hope you'll join us for our upcoming episodes as well, including a session in January to talk about rental property data and registries, another in March on surveying your residents about their housing needs, one in June on housing conditions and quality data, and finally one planned for August on storytelling with local data. And each of these sessions will feature a fireside chat with someone like Kimberly, who has firsthand experience on the ground and will also update everyone here when registration for a new episode goes live. Next. So starting kind of from square one here, what do we actually mean when we say local data, particularly when we're talking about housing? At the most basic level, we mean information about people, properties, and transactions that are captured at the local level, often through really routine, kind of boring administrative processes like permitting new development, recording deeds, assessing property taxes. Useful data can also be captured by your community-based organizations. For example, think of a nonprofit in your city that's helping folks experiencing homelessness. They're probably collecting some information, or they could be, about those people, what landed them in the place that they are, what their needs and their preferences might be. Sometimes, though, there is a gap in local data. Say you need really specific information about vacant properties, or you need to know, do people feel safe in their homes and neighborhoods, and why? In that case, you might need to collect new data through a property inventory or a survey, for example. Next. Here are just a few examples of the kinds of local data that might already exist in your jurisdiction. Building permits, rental registries, and zoning maps can tell you a lot about your current housing supply and also trends over time. Property tax assessments, deeds, and rent data can tell you about the price of and demand for housing. Many jurisdictions do purchase rent data from companies like CoStar, and a few actually also collect their own rent data, and I'm going to share an example of that in just a minute. What about housing quality? That's an area where very little good national data exists for localities, but we have all kinds of interesting local data sets like code violations, 311 complaints, demolition permits, and even flood maps. Your local data about subsidies, tax delinquency and foreclosure, evictions, and utility shutoffs can tell you about housing affordability challenges. Then there are the data that you collect in your housing assistance programs, which can tell us more about the need and also evaluate whether those programs are working. And finally, there's all kinds of data that aren't housing data per se, but relate to housing and can help us understand, for example, how housing affects exposure to crime or access to good transportation and schools. Next. So why use these data? Well, there's a few really good reasons. In the first place, local data are spatially specific and granular. So whereas national data products usually offer summary statistics at a kind of limited number of geographic scales, local data sources are more likely to be at that household level, at the transaction level even, and to align with your local planning geographies, whether those be neighborhoods, boroughs, or wards. For small geographies and population groups, your national estimates based on survey data often have large margins of error, so it's difficult to know where the real number falls along that spectrum. And in these cases, local data can offer a more accurate kind of snapshot. Another thing is that national data sets are usually time lagged. So for example, the American Community Survey is only conducted, or the results rather are only available late the following year. But your housing markets and your policies might be changing more quickly than that. So you might need more up-to-date information. Local data can cover topics that national data sets just don't. We talked about housing quality. And finally, gathering and sharing local data can be a way of building trust and social capital. Collaborative data projects could raise awareness about important issues, allow you to create coalitions, and engage your residents and stakeholders. Next. So I want to give this quick example from Montgomery County, Maryland, which shows off some of the advantages of local data. So perhaps like some of you, the county was frustrated that it didn't know where rents were going up, how fast they were going up. And so it decided to do an online survey of rental buildings, which it conducts every April, asking each of the owners on its rental registry about their rent levels, about occupancy, about turnover. And if landlords don't reply to the survey, they're subject to a fine. And the county then uses these data in countless ways, including actually setting rent levels and income levels in their housing assistance programs. Next. So you might be shaking your head at this point because you know it is easier said than done. In other words, local data do come with unique challenges. They are often housed in lots of different places. They might have confidential information in them. And so you might need special permission to access them or someone else's staff time to pull them for you. Local data can also be incomplete or hard to interpret, just messy, and as a result, there could be a lot of cleaning and manipulation that's required before the data set is ready for the kind of analysis that you want to do. With new data, you do have an opportunity to kind of shape the format, but that collection can be expensive and time-consuming. All right, next. If you can overcome all those challenges, once you have the local data in hand, they can be really powerful. Tracking change over time can reveal important trends. For example, what if your data are telling you that it's taking longer and longer to award a building permit? That could tell you something important about your development approval process or just the environment that your developers are operating in. Linking different data sets together can reveal important relationships. What if you link your code violations data with your property tax assessment data, and you're seeing that code violations are happening in the same places where you have more absentee owners or more investor owners? That could inform policy in important ways. Mapping data can help you see where you should focus your energy or reveal spatial disparities. And then if multiple actors have access to the same data set, they might be able to work together better. Next. Here's a quick example of using local data to learn about investor buyers from Newark, New Jersey. So in 2022, researchers at Rutgers used 4 decades of local deeds data from the New Jersey Tax Board to show that after the foreclosure crisis, large-scale institutional investors started buying up large amounts of property in the city, including formerly owner-occupied homes. And by 2020, almost half of all residential sales were being made to these kinds of institutional buyers. And the researchers also were able to link this trend to rents going up and homeownership going down. And then Newark was able to respond with a bunch of new programs, including one that is meant to expand access to homeownership for longtime residents, and is also considering kind of beefing up its rent registry requirements. Next. Now just a minute on collecting new data. So there's a variety of methods you can use, and the one you choose might be more appropriate depending on what it is you want to know. Inventories, I would say, are really useful when you're trying to collect detailed information about place-based entities like vacant properties, homes, neighborhood amenities, that sort of thing. Scraping is when you're creating a new data set out of information that's embedded in web applications, PDF documents, and so on. For example, you might be scraping real estate listings to look at asking rents, or scraping court documents to track evictions. Surveys can be really valuable for learning about larger groups of individuals. A major challenge there, though, is sampling bias. In other words, the population that you're able to reach with your survey might not be a great representation of the population as a whole. And there's a few things you can do to kind of mitigate that. On the front end, you can do robust outreach. You can try to compensate your survey takers. You can even embed the survey in an existing interaction that your residents have with local government. And then on the back end, you can try to do some weighting of your responses by demographic characteristics to try to get you to a more reliable estimate. And then finally, interviews and focus groups, which give you really rich qualitative data about perceptions, about rationales, decision-making, and so on. But of course, are time-consuming, can be expensive, and might be a little hard to generalize. Next. This is one of my very favorite examples from Cleveland, Ohio. And as you might know, Cleveland faces persistent issues with vacant housing, with rundown housing, and the city needed to have much more specific information about where these problem properties are. So first in 2015, and then again in 2018, and most recently in 2023, the city has partnered with a local nonprofit called the Western Reserve Land Conservancy to send out a bunch of surveyors in teams of 2 to use a mobile app to kind of grade properties on a scale from A to F. using visual inspection, looking at the sidewalk conditions, looking for illegal dumping, signs of vacancy, and also data that's kind of uploaded into the app, from utilities companies, property data, et cetera. And then this really super detailed inventory is used to target city programs like demolitions, rehab investments, and programs that try to encourage residents to adopt vacant property. And the cool thing is, because the city has been doing this every few years, they can kind of start to see trends, like how fast does an A property become a B or a C, or how fast are properties falling into this B and F category. And then that allows them to understand how many resources they should be allocating on an annual basis as well. Next. So the last thing I want to talk about quickly, and I know Kimberly will speak to this too, is building local capacity to do all these things, to access, collect, and use local data. Because often you and your staffs just don't have time, or you don't have the resources to fund these kind of efforts. So one possibility is to develop relationships with your local educational institutions. Sometimes a local data project is actually a great capstone project for students. One of my colleagues recently shared an example where students worked with Hennepin County, Minnesota to refine their point-in-time homelessness count and make it more accurate. Of course, the first step here is making sure that there is a data sharing process in place for these outside institutions to access and properly protect your data. Another strategy could be kind of linking arms with your neighboring jurisdictions to pool capacity and funds. Sometimes, though, data are really siloed even within your jurisdiction. And in that case, thinking of a new structure where maybe you have a single data administrator or a platform that is shared across agencies and departments could help. And finally, rather than building a new data collection effort from the ground up, it might be useful to think about opportunities to embed or improve data collection in your existing interactions. So is there a way to train intake staff at your housing service providers to ask their clients a few questions and record the data in a usable way? Or can your code officers record more detailed housing conditions data in a way that's easy for you to use? All right, with that, I think we can turn to our chat. All right.
Claudia, I'm going to ask you also to enable the chat function for the participants as well.
I think I've just done that, hopefully. All right, shall we stop sharing?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's so great to have you, Kimberly. And so my first question is, I know that in Baltimore, Codemap is kind of the launching pad for using local data to inform your housing policy. Can you talk about what that is? How does Codemap work and how has it evolved over time?
Of course, sure. Thank you. We love to talk about Codemap in Baltimore. So Codemap is it's built on Esri software. It is a parcel level, it has parcel level data for basically every single parcel in Baltimore City. And for every parcel, there are approximately 180 to 100 to 200 data sets that lay on top of each of those parcels. So you can type in an address in Codemap and you can get all sorts of information about that property. So you can get a history of all permits pulled on that property, if it's a rental property, whether or not that property has a valid rental license. You could get information on whether or not that property is a vacant property. If it is a vacant property, when that VBN, vacant building notice, was issued, how many times that vacant building notice was issued, how many fines or fees have been issued on that property, for how many code enforcement actions. And so it's a very valuable tool for our city. It is maintained by our research and analytics team, and it's evolved over time in a couple of key ways. So It started back in 2015 as a code enforcement tool. It was primarily used by our code enforcement division to drive code enforcement action. So drive our kind of strategic planning around how to deploy our 55-ish code enforcement officers, as well as make decisions around how to file receivership cases. So trying to get vacant properties back into productive reuse through the district court. But since then, we've kind of rebranded it back in 2020 when we launched Codemap 2.0 to Community Development Map. And that's when we added a bunch of new layers, a bunch of new features. And so we did two things. We added custom features like uploading your own data that you can overlay. So if you're a nonprofit or a developer, you can upload, addresses of properties that you're developing to see how that overlays with neighborhood characteristics, development characteristics. You can make your own maps. You can create your own shape files so you can collaborate with other people in an agency, at a nonprofit, at a development company. So if you want to work or develop in a specific neighborhood and you don't want to send screen grabs, you can actually create your own shape file and email it over to someone. And then the other thing is just the amount of data that is housed in Codemap. It really started with just a few layers like VBNs, our vacant building notice data, our permit data, and it's expanded to so much more. So for example, now our CDBG division, our consolidated planning team, refers to Codemap when they're evaluating whether or not a potential community partner is actually eligible for CDBG grant funding because we have the HUD. I forget what the technical name of the map is, but essentially there's a low mod income map. And so you have to determine eligibility for what the grant is asking for and determine whether or not where that organization is working is actually eligible in the city of Baltimore.
Oh, wow. Well, that sounds like a really data-driven approach. And so I'd love to hear, do you have any concrete examples? I know you've already shared one about how Baltimore uses local data then to inform housing policy.
Yeah, of course. So, for example, we have our vacant building notice data on Codemap. So you can look up a specific address or you can kind of zoom out and see vacant building notice data by neighborhood. And that's really helpful to look at neighborhood trends, right? But we actually were able to create a data sharing partnership with the fire department that was born out of a tragedy. In turn, we were able to kind of, make lemonade out of lemons. So back in 2022, we had a pretty tragic experience where some firefighters died fighting a fire in a vacant building. And part of what we uncovered was that firefighters didn't know when they were getting called to an active fire, whether or not they were going to fight a fire in a vacant building. So now we've created a data sharing link between our system and CAD, their system. So whenever a firefighter or a fire truck, I don't know what their technical terms are, but whenever they're called to an active fire, information will pop up on their end in CAD that lets them know whether or not they're being called to fight a fire at a vacant building. And so it's these kind of partnerships that we're able to create because we have such a robust data system and because it's all digitized within our existing system chip that we're actually about to replace.
Wow. Yeah.
We've also
go ahead.
There's many more, but we've created, for example, we don't have a great way to track, new units that are coming online, but because we have a robust permit data system, we've been able to create my director of research and analytics created a Python script to scrape that data from permit data that we have. And then last this is more of an advocacy tool, but something that I'm really proud of that our agency does is I mentioned that we have rental licensing information on Codemap that's publicly available. So in the state of Maryland, it's illegal to evict a tenant if the landlord does not have a valid rental license and registration on the property. And so we provide that information. And so that's information that a tenant or their lawyer or their advocate can use in rent court to prevent evictions. And because we have over 100,000 eviction filings in Baltimore City every year, it's very important to have access to this data.
Wow. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're doing to address vacancy with local data?
Of course, yes. Vacancy is a persistent problem in Baltimore City for a very long time. We hovered at around 16,000 vacant buildings. I'm happy to report, though, that as of yesterday, we have 13,712 vacant buildings on our official roll count. Since Mayor Scott took office, we've seen a 13.3 approximately percent reduction in vacants. And that's really because of this kind of whole block strategy that our agency has been doing slowly but surely for the past decade or so, using GIS data, using Codemap, using all of these data layers that we have access to create what we call our whole block planning strategy. So we have all these tools in our toolkit that we have access to because we're, a full stack development agency. So we can do demolition, acquisition, stabilization, homeowner repair support, as well as provide developer incentives and home buyer down payment incentives, all under one agency. So we take all of these tools, we pull up Codemap, we have like a sandbox version of it, and then we assign a strategy per block, a predominant strategy per block. And we have 22 neighborhoods across 7 geographies in the city that represent 60% of all vacants in Baltimore City that we've identified where we have concentrations of vacants. And so we're applying this whole block strategy. And so because it's GIS coded, we're able to create a financial model and like block counts or property counts and be able to model very accurately what this is actually going to cost us and how many properties we're actually going to be able to put back into productive reuse, demolish, prepare for site assembly in a very specific and accurate way, like down to the address level. So we're very excited about that work. We were able to receive some funding from through ARPA COVID relief funds to start that work, and hopefully we'll have more to announce on that. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, it sounds like there's clearly been a ton of advantage here of using local data. I'd love to
Yes.
hear about some of the challenges. What have your challenges been?
There's 2 that come to mind. First is, I'm talking about, so our permit data is housed in e-permits, and that was created before I was brought on as the Director of Research and Analytics, now the Chief of Policy and Research. Then there's all of our vacant building notice data that's housed in CHIP, also created before I was brought on. And so all of these legacy data systems, and this is something I notice even now, is tend to be created without consulting the analysts that are going to be taking that data and using it for management, for the mayor's office, for whatever sort of government structure that you're working in, local government structure that you're working in. And if you're not consulting the analysts at the beginning of the creation of whatever software you're building out, whatever tool you're building out, you might not be collecting the right data at the outset to be able to answer the questions and make policy recommendations that you want at the back end. And so that's something that I always recommend and try to push as much as possible. And I'm lucky to be able to do that because my team sits in the commissioner's office. But that's a challenge that I notice. Another challenge is that, and this is really more from a management perspective, is that your data is only going to be as good as what is input into the system. And so having really high standards for what is being input into whatever database you're using, even if it's an Excel spreadsheet, having data validation, having standards for how an entire team is inputting data into that spreadsheet is really, really, really important, because a lot of times data gets dumped onto my team and we're just asked to do something with it. And that's not a good data practice to fall into, because it slows our work down. And then ultimately it slows down the work of our agency.
I'm also really curious just about how you've managed to build this amazing capacity that Baltimore has to do these powerful things with data and to implement good data practices.
That's a really good question. So first is, I joke that I lost all my technical skills as soon as I went into management, because when you go into a management position, even if it's with a data team, you have to quickly become different things. So I consider myself a cheerleader for my team. I'm here to support their work and to make space for them to learn new skills. Excuse me, sorry, I have allergies this week. And I think that bringing that mindset to the team, to my team, is what has allowed us to be so successful. So for example, at the beginning, like around middle of 2020 during the pandemic, none of us knew anything about Power BI as a team. So we just spent a few like 3-hour chunks learning about Power BI. And now it's fundamental to the work that we build, the work that we do as a research team. So one of our like premier tools that is used all the time is our key stats dashboard, which tracks our vacant building notice count, which is fundamental to understanding vacancy in the city. And that is built in Power BI. And I think that it's because I create space as a manager to like learn these types of skills. Another thing that's really important to me as a manager of people in an analytics position is paying people what they're worth. And I don't think that gets talked enough about in government, especially, you know, if you have a civil service position or if you're, you know, locked into certain salary requirements. I get that, you know, we're never going to be able to do a bunch of things because we're locked in based on, you know, union rules, salary rules, whatever sorts of HR rules are put in place as government employees, plus the fact that we're never going to be able to match private sector analytical position salaries. That being said, there is a middle ground, and I've found ways to meet that. And in my work as the chief of policy and research, I've set a new salary floor for analysts and been able to attract amazing talent because of it. And just like for context, like the new salary floor is 30% higher than what it was 5 years ago. And that's really important, really, really important. And I'm happy to talk offline to whomever about how I did that. So
That's great.
yeah, I feel very
Okay.
strongly about that last point.
So I'm going to ask one more question before we kind of open it up. I just want to know, what are you excited about in 2024 when it comes to local data?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'm not sure about the timing of it, but we're getting like a whole new enterprise software system. I don't know if it's getting launched in 2024 or not, but basically e-permits, CHIP, which is how houses all of our vacant building notice data, all of that is getting upgraded. So I'm very excited about that. We recently hired 2 new analysts to replace to like restaff out our team. They're doing incredible work, so I'm really excited to see what they produce in 2024. Plus, we were budgeted for 2 new positions, a demographer and an analyst who will just focus on understanding our vacancy data. And so I'm really excited to hire those positions in 2024 with the new salary floor that I've set.
Well, this is great. And it looks like we do have some questions coming in, and folks, like, feel free to keep going. But Blake, what do you have for us?
Sure. So the first question, we'll open it up to you, Kimberly. Does Baltimore have a rent registry? Is that what restricts evictions in some cases if the proper details are not filed? And if so, is there any coordination between the state, or would that be beneficial?
Okay, so like a rent registry, like our rental properties required to be registered. I think that's the question. And the answer is yes, they are legally required to be registered. We coordinate with the state in the sense that there is a statewide organization called MLSC that coordinates our right to counsel program. And so that's like kind of the back end piece of how do we prevent evictions for people and like provide tenant right services. So that's the coordination that we're doing right now. We aren't coordinating with state DHCD specifically on rental registration. And I'm not sure necessarily if we need to, but it would be nice. And again, I'm not sure, I haven't looked into this yet, but it might be nice to have like a requirement statewide that all rental properties need to be licensed and registered.
Great. So our next question is for you again, Kimberly. What advice would you give to other local government officials interested in creating a tool like Codemap?
Oh, honestly, reach out to me and so I can connect you to Henry, because I have no more technical skills. So I can't tell you how like the technical things that you need, but Esri is the platform that it's built on. And honestly, I would say the first thing though that I would say is like think about what you're trying. I always say think about what you're trying to accomplish. Like, are you just trying to understand what is going on with each of the the properties in your jurisdiction? Like, what data are you trying to gather all under one place? And it doesn't. And then also the third thing is inventorying all the data, like the parcel level data that you have access to, like reliable access to. That's really important. And that's what makes Codemap such a powerful tool, is because this is primarily driven by parcel level data. And reliable parcel level data. That is the key there.
So our next question is about sources. Could you talk about preferred sources to get rent price data and what kind of complexities you find when trying to find this type of data?
I might punt this to Claudia because it's something that like I'm actually like in the process of. We're doing our first as a city comprehensive housing plan next year. And we haven't been able to do that. We don't have a good source besides ACS 5-year estimates. That's what we currently use. And we have we are in the process also of updating our neighborhood data profiles. They were kind of static PDF maps. Our new research analyst is putting them into like digital kind of Power BI dashboardy type things. But we use ACS 5-year estimates. We haven't purchased CoStar data. We haven't surveyed like Montgomery County, but I'm really intrigued by what Montgomery County is doing.
Yeah, I think we're like very interested at the Furman Center about how to collect better rent data. There are some kind of idiosyncratic, really local places that do it. I know there are a few in New York City, but New York City is not everywhere. So, you know, sometimes the option is purchasing data from real estate companies. That can be quite expensive. And also usually it's limited to your multifamily buildings. So, you know, if your housing base is really like single family rentals, it's not going to be a very accurate source of data for you. So really looking into surveying your owners, establishing a rent registry where you collect detailed information, and we will have an episode on that. So, you know, stay tuned.
Yeah, and I'll just add, that is, I'm sure why in the past we haven't purchased that data, because Baltimore City is 60% row homes. And so a lot of our rental market is row house data. It's not going to be multifamily.
Exactly. And this is a real gap. You know, we have great data on home prices and home values, but rents, not so much. And more Americans are renting. So it's increasingly like a very big gap.
Great. So Claudia, this next question is for you. You mentioned the importance of increasing social capital. Are there any available metrics or data to quantify the enhancement of social well-being through an improved housing experience?
Oh, this is a great question. I wish I had some of my colleagues on the call for this one. I would say we don't have great indicators of social capital. There's, of course, qualitative data collection that you can do through surveying, through one-on-one interviews, to try to ask questions about the bonds people feel with their neighbors, with their landlord even, and that can get you some hints. There are emerging data sets around social media connections that are being interpreted in interesting ways to get at this question of social capital. But I would say that's very much an emerging field. Great question.
Great. So back to you, Kimberly. How often do you interact with NGOs, local offices, and the mayor's office to ensure that this data contributes to their programs?
Oh, that's a great question. So for example, our block level planning, all of those decisions are made in partnership with the CDC's neighborhood association presidents and key community leaders like religious leaders, neighborhood organizers that are in those 22 neighborhoods that I mentioned. We also have a ton of what we call our asset building community engagement areas. And essentially what those are our impact investment areas, which are those 22 geographies, but like in reverse. So community associations, developers that have come to us and said, hey, we want to replicate what you're doing in the impact investment areas. Will you work with us? And our answer is, of course, always. And so we have like sometimes I think too many working groups, too many partnerships going on just because it's like too many meetings. But we're meeting quite frequently. With respect to, I think there was a question about the mayor's office. I meet with the mayor's office every day. The mayor is also a power user of Codemap, so I actually give him like a private like tutorial on like new updates to it, like at least once a year. And he is frequently, you know, on community walks, like with Codemap on his phone. He has one of those phones that like folds out, so it's like a larger screen, using Codemap. He's, yeah, definitely a power user. And I think, was there one more group that was asked about? NGOs, mayor's office, and something else.
It was NGOs. Oh, I'll find it for you. NGOs, local offices in the mayor's office. So
Oh, local offices. I mean, we are the local office. Yeah. So for example, like DOT asked us to put up their Greenway Trails network, like all the different proposed and existing and like in progress routes on Codemap. So like that's up. Like we have other agencies that ask us to put data up on Codemap. So it's, even though it's a DHCD tool, it really has become a citywide tool.
the next
We're always
question
taking
is,
requests on like, hey, you want to see this layer? Sure, just email us. It's literally like a request. There's like like a layer grouping called requested layers.
great. So the next question is about data. So do you have any recommendations to tweak data collection on a federal level that would more integrate it effectively on a local level?
Oh my God, make it easier to get census data, like to request census data for specific projects by the block group. Besides like the 2020, like the 10-year decennial census situation. Like I know our planning department gets access to it, but then they have all these like really strict requirements on like how to use it and who gets to look at it, and then they have to destroy it. And just like being able as a like a local jurisdiction to access it at a block group level and being able to create those data sharing partnerships, like and it be, while being sensitive that it is like very personal data, and just being able to create that sort of partnership is, I think, would be really, really helpful, because I'm so tired of logging on to federal data websites and seeing like outdated data that's like at like the city level, stuff like that. It's just
And
not helpful
yeah,
at
I think
all
that's
in any
exactly
way,
right.
shape, or form.
And I would add, there's been a lot of great data collection happening at the federal level during
Yeah.
COVID, but those might be, those are phasing out. So we've gotten information, for example, through the household pulse survey about how housing relates to, ability to pay rent, ability to feed your children, all these different things that we were never able to tie together in the same way before. But that survey, sunset. So bringing some of those questions back, or even, really earlier census questions about subsidy recipients, things like that have gradually dropped out, but would be quite useful.
Oh, and also I think too, you can get some census data, but you have to pay like custom census data polls, but you have to pay like $5,000 for it. That feels absurd. Yeah, now I'm just going here, but anyways.
A great question. What advice would you give to folks interested in entering local data and this field in general? And what training and professional development would you recommend?
Great question. Okay. So this is two parts. I love this question so much. Okay. So first, to managers on this call, take a chance on people that don't have like traditional like MPP backgrounds like myself. I have an MPP from UC Berkeley. It's considered like the gold standard of, going to it's like consider the gold standard of going to like that's considered like the most traditional route to doing data analytics training and doing policy training and doing a job like what I'm doing. But there are so many other ways to acquire these skills. Like there are boot camps, there are online open source courses and internships. So I would say to managers, be like creative and open to people that don't have like traditional MPPs like myself, or like a traditional undergraduate mathematics degree or analytical degree or whatever. And so then my response to people who are interested in this are to really think about what kind of, and this is more philosophical, is like think about what kind of environment you learn best in and pick that route. And also think about the cost of that environment, because as we know and as we've seen, like student loans are not going away. And that is a very real cost. And I have student loans from my master's, despite working full-time essentially through my entire full-time degree. And this is like getting, a little more philosophical, but thinking about those two things, like the cost of whatever you're trying to do and what environment you learn best in. And then the third piece is also networking. Like networking, I think, is a very underrated way to get into these spaces. The way I got my first job as a fiscal legislative analyst is because I just networked really, really, really hard to get the position. I think was one of the most valuable ways in which I first got into Baltimore city government. And I just celebrated my 5-year anniversary a month ago. And it's because I reached out to the outgoing person in the position, had an informational interview, and it kind of snowballed from there. And again, for whoever asked that question, like Claudia, I feel free to give my email out. Like I mentor people all the time through this process. I'm also on the Women in Data board for Baltimore City as a mentor board member. So I give talks on salary negotiation, informational interviewing, networking. Like I'm literally working with someone right now who messaged me on LinkedIn. So yeah.
Well, Kimberly, thank you so much. I really can't thank you enough. And thanks to everyone for your fabulous questions and for joining us. We will be posting a recording of this on our website, and we'll send it to all of you who've registered. And we look forward to engaging with you in the future. So thank you so much.